Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 172 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got an interesting assortment. We've got a new modder coming in too. We've got a lot of different monkeys. We got a couple different species of mammal and a couple extinct ones as well. So really excited to get stuck into this one. But we're going to be starting off with our first bird of the pack, or only bird of the pack, today. We have got the Northern Jacana, done by Great Cakes Mods. You know, always makes a wonderful mods they do. Let's have a wonderful look at these guys. So this is the Great Cakes Mods Northern Jacana, or the Northern Jacara, or Jacana spinosa. These guys are a wader species, which is known to be a resident breeder in coastal Mexico, in western Panama, and on Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, in the Caribbean. And it also sometimes breeds in Texas, and has been seen as a vagrant in Arizona. So these guys are, the Jacanas are a group of wetland birds, and the way you can kind of tell them apart from a lot of birds is got these very, very huge feet and claws, as you can see there, that they use for walking on floating vegetation in shallow lakes. That is their preferred habitat. And they're also known as the Jesus bird because they walk around in water like Jesus Christ. They were first formally described in 1758 by Carl Linnaeus as a part of the group family in the Fucula spinosa. And they were thought to be bases count on spurwings, plover hens, but they was actually misidentified. They're now placed together in the genus Jacana with the wattled Jacana, which was introduced together with 1760 by French zoologists Martin and Jacques Bryson. And the species is monotypic, so there's no subspecies or anything, and the proposed races were not considered true. The genus names come from the Portuguese word Jacana for the wattled Jacana, which turns out to be derived from Tupi from Yasana, which means noisy water bird, and Spinosa means kind of like spiny water bird. That's basically what that name means in Latin, and it does fit pretty well. So the Northern Jacana is a medium-sized wader bird with long legs and elongated toes, as you see going on there. It measures about 21.5 to 24 centimeters, or about 8.5 to 9.4 inches in total length. And the females are actually significantly larger than the males, with the breeding female being on average about 161 grams, compared to the males, which is only about 91 grams, or between 5.7 ounces just to 3 ounces. So that's a female there. We'll have a look at a male. Let's see if we can spot a male. It's another female, I think. So you can have a look at the male. So you can see the males are definitely much, much smaller, which is quite interesting. They have a chestnut maroon body with a black head, neck, and breast. And the bill, you can see there is quite yellow, and they have a fleshy shield on the top of their forehead. The upper mandible as well, you can see, has that white base, and when in flight, the yellowish-green primary and secondary feathers are visible. And also visible are the bony spurs on the leading edge of the wing, which they can use to fend both themselves and their young. And young Jacana chicks are covered in down and have patterns that are like an orange, brown, and black with some white. Let's see if we can find a baby. So these are the patterns of the babies. With older chicks having grey or brownish underparts and juveniles having a white supercolour and white lores. So as I mentioned, they are got a wide range. They've ranged from Mexico to Panama, although they occasionally visit the southern US and can be seen in Arizona, where they like to live on floating vegetation, swamps, meadows, and ponds, or marshes and ponds. So you have another one going on here. So in terms of feeding, they feed on insects on the surface of the water and ovules of water lilies. They'll also eat things like snails, worms, small crabs, fish, mollusks, and seeds. And they completes this diet with birds with a similar diet like the sora. The breeding, these guys are actually quite unusual among birds, as they have a polyandrous breeding system. So the female Jacana lives in a territory that encompasses a territory of about 4 males, or 1 to 4 males. The male will form a pair bond with the female, which keeps the other females out of his territory. And pair bonds between females and her males remain throughout the year, even outside breeding season, and these relationships last until a male or female is replaced. The female maintains bonds with their mates through copulation and producing clutches for them, as well as protecting their territories and defending their eggs from predators. Monogamous pairs have sometimes been observed, but they do have a simultaneous polyandrous mating system. The female will mate with several males a day or form pair bonds with more than one male at a time, and due to the high energy cost of producing eggs, females are replaced more often than males. And if water levels remain constant, they can breed actually year-round, which is quite cool. The males construct typically a floating nest with whatever plant material they find, and a male jacana will grab vegetation and walk backwards to uproot it, and continue to walk backwards to drop the plant on the nest. And the male pushes against and steps on the plant parts to create a compact mound, and the best nests are ones with the most dense and stable. And the male may actually create several nests at different sites, so the female may choose one or find a site in her own in the territory. So these birds lay a clutch of 4 brown eggs with black markings, and these eggs usually measure about 30 by 23 centimeters, or about 1.8 to 0.91 inches. And the male incubates these eggs for about 28 days, and the female may sometimes shade and squat over the eggs, but rarely incubates them. The female may also reluctantly incubate the egg if the male doesn't have sufficient time to forage throughout the day due to rain or cool temperatures. Males spend most of their time, though, within their territory during incubation, but sometimes leave the nest unattended for a long period of time. The males performs when each egg hatches and stands next to the nest to peer into it. The males continue to incubate the remaining eggs while brooding the hatching chick. And while the eggs are hatched, the male will dispose of the remaining eggshells, and then also lead chicks into the water for within the next 24 hours. So chicks are able to swim, dive, and feed pretty shortly after hatching, and the males will not feed the chicks but lead them to food. The males will brood for the chicks for many weeks, but as the chicks get bigger, fewer can fit under the male's wing, so what they'll do is the males put them under their wing. Have you seen funny pictures of these birds with lots of little legs sticking out their wing? That's a dad with their babies in their wings, but as they get bigger, they can only hold so many. And females may brood chicks when the male's away. Territorial defense by both male and females increases when the chicks are born, and males are intolerant of intruders and makes calls to the female to help in predator defense. Females also respond to every call the male makes and invest much interest in the safety of the chicks, despite having little interaction with them. The female then provides the males with a new clutch when these chicks are about 6 to 12 weeks old. And in terms of predation, the predators of these guys are quite varied. They are preyed upon by different species of snakes, caimans, snapping turtles, and various mammals and birds. And vocalizations among them is usually between maiden pairs or between fathers and young. They'll make a clustered note call, which is a call made by individual notes clustered together when they attack intruders in the territory. And they also make call when eggs or chicks are not hit by predators, and the notes and their pattern depend on the urgency of the call. And calls are also made in flight with the females away from territory too long when the male cannot find a chick. And luckily they are considered quite common throughout their range. They do breed quite fast, and as I mentioned, they can breed year round, so there's no issue of replacement. But because of the draining of wetlands across a lot of their range, that could be a big issue for draining for agriculture and things like that. That could be an issue that could affect the species in the future. But yeah, really wonderful mod. Nice to see a cool bird. Jacana, and a great Jacana done by Great Cakes Mod. Always a winner. So next up, we've got a species of monkey. We have got the lesser spot-nosed monkey. Lesser spot-nosed monkeys. Let's have a look at these guys. So this one's done by Mega Kebab, and so is the next monkey species. So the lesser spot-nosed monkey, or Cetopithecus petasura, also known as the lesser spot-nosed gnon, the lesser white-nosed gnon, or the lesser white-nosed monkey, as a species of monkey in the family Pseudopithidae, and the small arboreal species with a long tail, and you can see their face is black with the white spot where they get their name on the nose. The white stripe extends from the temple to behind the ear, and the crown, back, and upper limbs and upper surface of tail are like an olive green, as you kind of see there, or khaki is sometimes called. In some forms, though, the middle and lower back have kind of a reddish tinge to them, and the individual hairs, especially on the crown, are flaked in black and yellow. And the undersides of their limbs and underside of the tail, you can see it's got like this very white or cream colour to them. So in terms of their habitat, this species is found in West Africa. So they range across the Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Togo, and have been also been recorded in southeastern Senegal. They're quite adaptable and live in a range of rainforests, types of forests, including like primary and secondary forests, gallery forests, recovering or regenerating felled areas, coastal scrublands, bushy areas along farmland, and actually cultivated fields. So they are doing quite well. So in terms of their ecology, these guys are diurnal, arboreal, and cryptic. So they come out during the day, they live in the trees a lot, and are quite a cryptic species. They like to hide. They move throughout the forest cautiously, seldom climbing to the high canopy, but most frequently in the understory layers and lianas. They form social groups of about 10 individuals, usually one male, several adult females, and their offspring. And they feed on leaves, fruits, flowers, and insects, gathering its food and storing it in its cheek pouches, like other species that we've been talking about recently. And when these are full, they are prominent, and the white throat reveals like a snowball, which is quite cute. So the reproduction of this species is little studied, but we'll have a look at the cute little baby if we can find one. I think there's a good example there. So there's a cute little baby there. But the reproduction of this species is little studied, with females giving birth to a single young after a gestation period of about 7 months or so. And breeding does not appear to be seasonal, so typically when they have enough resources, they will have babies. And in terms of their status, they are quite a common and adaptable species, but some of the areas which they live in have been degraded, but they are tolerant to disturbances, so they are well adaptable, so they're not quite as affected by habitat loss or clearing as many other species, so that's kind of a good sign. But they all are also hunted for bushmeat in some areas, and some, while they not have identified a lot of these threats like bushmeat and, habitat loss means they are near threatened, so that's considered what they are. There could be there's issues that could really hurt them in the future, but they seem to be doing okay at the moment. But yeah, really, really cool. So let's see if we can have a look at that's the male or female young baby. What's this one? It's not even clicking for me at the moment. So that's a female there. Nothing too much different, not strong sexual dimorphism with these guys. So next up, we've got another megakebab primate. Megakebab really does love making primates. So next up we got Allen's swamp monkey. So let's have a look at these guys. So this is Allen's swamp monkey. Let's see, that's a male. So the Allen swamp monkey, or Alopeithecus nigroviridis, is a species of old world monkey and the only member of the genus Alopeithecus, and is considered sister to the gunons, or things like, as I mentioned, these monkeys, the spot-nosed monkeys and other species of gunons, but they differ a lot in their habits and dentition, and were named after American zoologist Joel Ashburn Allen. In terms of their range, these guys live mainly in the Congo Basin, the Republic of the Congo, and west of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Cameroon. They've actually been reported from the Zanga-Shanga Special Reserve in the Central African Republic in 2016, so they're doing quite well, and they are considered least concerned, so that's good. These guys are a rather strong built animal, so really, really wide and, big and strong. Their slight webbing of their fingers and toes point to their partly aquatic way of life. As I mentioned, they are swamp monkeys. Allen swamp monkeys can reach a full body length of about 45 to 60 centimeters, with a tail that's about 50 centimeters long. And males weigh up to 6 kilograms, which is much larger than the females that can weigh about 3.5 kilograms. So they're just under twice the size of a female. So you can see the male here and the female. Let's see if we can spot one there. Is that a female or is that another male? Yeah, that's another male. See if we can spot a female. That must be her. There we go. So that's a female. She's much lighter. So Allen swamp monkeys are diurnal, and they regularly look for food on the ground. They typically inhabit water-rich areas and can swim quite well, diving typically to avoid danger. And they are quite social as well. They can live in groups of up to about 40 animals, communicating with different calls, gestures, and touches, very similar to other monkey species. Have a look at the little baby while we get a chance. Real little cute guy. Their diets consist of fruits and leaves, as well as beetles and worms. And little is known about the mating habits of the species, but the female bears young, which are typically weaned 3 months after being born, and they become mature at about 3 to 5 years. And they are actually quite long-lived as well. They can live up to about 23 years. These guys are common in their habitat, but they do have predators. Things like raptors, so such as birds of prey, snakes, and the bonobo are considered natural predators of the species, so they are hunted. And they also hunted as bushmeat, so that's another reason they could be declining. But luckily they are considered least concern at the moment. But yeah, really, really cool animals, and it's nice to see, you know, a nice animal there. Nice to see another cool one. Definitely looks quite nice. Definitely a big fan of the swamp monkey there. Definitely come out quite nicely. Let's see, you can see a good little bit of a look. I want to see when the light. Yeah, there we are. So yeah, looks pretty spot on. Pretty good. So we're going to be moving on. Those two were done by Mega Kebab. Now we're going to be moving on. This one's done by Pork13, who is a new modder, who's made a couple cool new mods that we'll show off. So we've got here the Wild Bactrian Camel. So let's have a look at these guys here. Really, really nice mod. So the Wild Bactrian Camel, or Camelus ferus, these guys are a critically endangered species of camel that are only found in northwestern China and southwestern Mongolia. They are closely related, but not ancestral to the modern domestic camel, or the domestic Bactrian camel, or Camelus bacterus. And studies actually show that they've been separated from each other for at least 700,000 years, and potentially up to a million years. So they are not that closely related. And currently, as I mentioned, they are critically endangered. There's currently only about 950 living wild Bactrian camels. And I'll get into a little bit more about that soon. So the name was these guys were originally considered a subspecies of the domestic Bactrian camel. But then they were found to be split apart. They was described as their own subspecies due to their own species because of the big genetic split between them. So now they're considered their own species. In terms of the description, they don't look too different from other camels. They have long, narrow, slit-like noses, a double row of long, thick eyelashes with ears with hair to protect them from desert sandstorms. They have tough, undivided soles with two large toes that spread wide apart, and a horny layer that enables them to walk on rough and hot, stony terrain. And their thick and shaggy hide changes colour to light brown to beige during winter. And like one of the relatives, as I mentioned, the Bactrian camel, they're one of the few mammals able to eat snow to provide itself with liquids in the winter. And while the legend is that camels store water in their humps is a misconception, they are able to conserve water. However, long periods without water will result in deterioration of the animal's health. So don't store water in them, it's mainly just fat. But yeah, they can go quite a while, unlike a lot of the other mammals, for water. So differences from domestic Bactrian camels, there is a lot of differences. While Bactrian camels appear similar to domestic ones, but there's a lot of differences. As I mentioned, they are quite different genetically. There are several differences. The wild Bactrian camel was slightly smaller than the domestic, and is considered a little bit more leaner and meaner, like slender, smaller feet, narrow feet, and the body is a lot more compressed. The humps of the wild camels are also smaller, lower, and more conical in shape of those domestic camels, and these humps may often be about half the size of those of a domestic camel. And the wild camel has a different shape of foot and a flatter skull, which is interesting, so they have a little bit of a flatter skull. The wool of the wild Bactrian camel is also sandy coloured and shorter and sparser than domestic camels, which potentially would have been bred for a little bit more of a beautiful, like intense coat, almost like, how sheep are. And they're actually also able to survive on water saltier than seawater, something that no other mammal in the world can tolerate, including the domestic Bactrian camel. So that's a really interesting adaptation they have. So in terms of behaviour, these Bactrian camels can generally move in groups of up to about 30 individuals, so groups of 6 to 30 are more common, depending on the availability of food. They are fully migratory and widely scattered with a population that is as low as 5 per 100 kilometres. They travel in a group with a single male as a lead and assemble near water points where larger groups can also be seen. They have a lifespan of about 40 years and they breed during winter with an overlap in the raining season. So we'll have a look at the babies. As really, really cute little guys. So typically they will start breeding at about age 5, especially females, and they have a cycle of 2 years. And typically, wild Bactrian camels seen alone are post-dispersal young individuals who have just met sexual maturity. So in terms of the habitat, these guys live in arid plains and hills where water sources are scarce and there's very little vegetation, with shrubs as their main food source. And they also live in areas with quite varying temperatures. So the summer temperature can range between 40 to 50 degrees, 104 to 222 degrees Fahrenheit, and winter can be as low as minus 30 degrees or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. So they travel over long distances. They're very migratory. Oh, they're having a fight there. We're all right about that. Have a look at you over there, girl. So wild Bactrian camels travel over long distances, seeking water in places close to mountains and springs, or hill slopes covered in sloe that provide some moisture. Sizes of herds can be about 100 camels, but they generally consist of 2 to 15, and this is reported due to arid environment and heavy poaching. Well, reduced because of that. The wild Bactrian camel are limited to 3 pockets in northwestern China and southwestern Mongolia. China spotted 39 and is estimated about 600 to 650 camels in the Altun Shalop Nur reserves combined in late 2018, with 48 spotted in Juhag in 2018. And these reserves is estimated to be about 100 camels exist per reserve, and these guys in the 200 early estimate, and it's believed in Mongolia the population is about 800. Though in ancient times they were much more common. These guys were seen from the Great Bend of the Yellow River, extending west into Mongolia deserts and further north into northwest China and central Kazakhstan. And in the 1800s, due to hunting and meat for its meat and hides, their presence was noted in remote areas around the Gobi Desert, the Tamarkan and Kutang deserts, and today the only remnant populations recorded in Mongolia and China. And as 1964, China actually begun testing nuclear weapons in Lop-Nur, home to many wild Bactrian camels. And these camels actually experienced no apparent ill effects from the radiation and continued to breed naturally. And instead, their habitat became a restricted military zone where human activity is kept at a minimum. And after China signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, they were reclassified as an endangered species. And since then, human incursions in the areas had a sharp drop to the camel populations, with the extent habitat of camels being further disturbed by new roads and exploration for oil. In addition as well, the border between China and Mongolia prevents the camels from migrating between the Chinese and Mongolian populations. And the 2013 study confirmed there's at least 382 wild camels in China, and the total population in Chinese nature reserves is believed to be between 640 to 740. So there's lots of different estimates, and the highest at least be a little under 1,000. So that's a little bit sad. But as I mentioned, there are genetic analyses that looked into these camels and suggest to be quite distantly related, believed to be split around 700,000 to 1.1 million years ago. Ancient DNA suggests that the Bactrian camels are related to the extinct giant camel Camelus kolboki, which went extinct about 20,000 years ago. And while they're distinct by both living Bactrian camels based on their genomics, they're nestled within living wild Bactrian camels, suggesting they were interbreeding with this extinct camel. But yeah, as we go on, the wild Bactrian camel is considered critically endangered by the IUCN and was deemed critical in the 1960s. The UK-based Wild Camel Protection Foundation suggests there's only about 950 individuals left, and the current trend is still decreasing. And the London Zoological Society considers this the 8th most endangered large mammal in the world, and is on the critically endangered species list. And is also one of the top 10 focal species of the Evolutionary Distinct and Globally Endangered, or EDGE project, which primarizes unique and threatened species for conservation. And observations during 5 field expeditions starting in 1983 suggest the population may be facing an 80% decline within the next 30 years. The biggest threats to these guys include things like poaching, climate change, being hunted, and human encroachment on their habitat. In the Gobi area, believed to be about 30 camels are poached every year, and 20 in the Lopo National Park. Hunters will kill the camels by laying landmines in saltwater springs where they drink. And other threats include the scarcity of water, such as oases, attacks by wolves, hybridization with domestic Bactrian camels, which is leading to a concern of loss of genetically distinct populations, or infertile individuals, which particularly water viable bulls for a large number of females during their lifetimes. Toxic effluent releases for illegal mining, redesignation of wildlife areas to medicinal areas and industrial areas, and shaping grazing areas with sharing grazing areas with domestic animals. But due to the increased population, they seem to migrate more in search of grazing lands that may compete for food or water sources with introduced domestic stock, and sometimes are shot by farmers. And the only extant predators that regularly target the species is wolves, and which have seemed to be weaker and weather better camels as they try to reach the oases. And during the increasingly dry conditions of the species range, the number of cases of wolf predation around these oases has increased, so they are getting just hammered by everything. But luckily there are They're getting a bit loud there. But luckily there are several efforts to try and protect the species. One of the ones, you always want to make sure that they're helping. Several initiatives have been initiated by the governments of China and Mongolia to conserve this species. That includes ecosystem-based management and setting up reserves. The Wild Camel Protection Fund, which is only such charity of its kind, is with the main goal of the wild and its natural desert environment to ensure that the status does not go extinct to the wild. These actions are taken by various organizations motivated and supported by the IUCN and the WCPF, which includes establishment of more nature reserves in China and Mongolia for their conservation, breeding them in captivity, and captive females can actually even breed twice every 2 years, which may not happen in the wild, to prevent extinction. The captive breeding program, initiated by WCPF in 2003 in Mongolia, has initial program was breeding the last non-hybridized herds of Bactrian camels, have proven a success with the birth of several wild camels. So they are doing well in a captive breeding program. And the wild Bactrian camel was also considered to be introduced into Pleistocene Park in northern Siberia as a proxy for the extinct Pleistocene camel species that lived there. And if proven feasible, this actually could increase the geographic range, adding another safe place for them to live in a protected reserve. And I think this is a good idea for conservation. However, though, 2021 domestic camels were introduced to the park instead. So that's a little bit sad, but it would be cool to have, I reckon they should have done it with the wild camels. If they could have got the permits and everything necessary, it would have been another safe area to have these camels. And probably would have done okay. But yeah, really, really cool. Another really cool species to get to talk about. And one that's not mentioned too often, so nice to see a wild camel. So next up, Pork 13 has also done another wonderful mod for us. We have got the Florida Panther, which is quite a cool one. So the Florida Panther is a population of cougars living in South Florida. They typically live in pine trees, tropical hardwood hammocks, and freshwater swamps. And they range from the Big Cypress National Park into the Everglades and around rural communities, even like in Colder, Henry Lee, and Moore County. And the only confirmed cougar population in the eastern United States, and currently only occupies about 5% of the historic range. And as of 2024, there's only believed to be about 200 individuals left. So we'll talk about that. Florida panthers are spotted at birth, but typically have blue eyes, and as they grow, that fades, and their coat comes particularly tan, and their eyes have a yellowish hue. The panther's underbelly is completely white, or creamy white, and they have black tips on tails and ears. Florida panthers also lack the ability to roar, and instead make distinct calls like whistles, chirps, growls, hisses, and purrs. And Florida panthers are average size for the species, being smaller than cougars in colder climates, but larger than cougars in the neotropics. So that's a good example of Bergman rule. So the ones down in Patagonia are bigger than these guys, but the ones around, in the Brazil are smaller than these guys. Typically, adult female Florida panthers weigh between 29 to 45 kilograms, or 64 to 100 pounds, while large males can weigh between 45 and 72 kilograms, or about 100 to 150 pounds, with total body length being about 1.8 to 2.2 meters, or 5'9" to 7'2", with a shoulder height of about 60 to 70 centimeters, or about 24 to 28 inches, with male panthers being average about 9% longer and 33% heavier than females, because males grow at a faster rate for females and for a longer time. So they were originally considered a subspecies of the cougar, Puma concala cori, in the late 19th century, but it was actually found that these guys, there's basically no genetic difference between other panthers. So they were just lumped into the North American species because there's not much genetic difference between them. There's not really much you can tell apart from like a cougar from Florida and a cougar from California. So they're considered basically the same thing, and just pretty much the same as all the North American cougars are now considered the subspecies Puma conger. So as I mentioned, they like to live in these forests and things like that. We mentioned that. In terms of their diet, these guys are a large carnivore in their ecosystem, whose diets consist of small animals such as raccoons, armadillos, nutras, hare, mice, and waterfowl. as long as larger prey like storks, white-tailed deer, feral pigs, and young American alligators. They're also quite an opportunistic hunter and have been known to prey on livestock and domestic animals, including cattle, goat, horses, pigs, sheep, chickens, dogs, and cats. And when hunting, panthers shift their hunting environment based on what their prey base is, and female panthers will typically shift both home range and movement due to reproductive rates. And according to a study in 2022 by the University of Georgia, Florida panthers are now the main cause of death for white-tailed deer in southwest Florida, so they do a good job at controlling the numbers of panthers. I mean, of deer, I mean. So in terms of their early life, we'll have a look at the cute little baby. So they're not too different from panthers in that regard, but we want to have a look at this little cutie. So you can see the little spots on this guy there. Isn't he bloody adorable? So panther kittens are born in dens created by their mothers, often in dense scrub. They often be chosen. These dens are chosen by a variety of factors, including prey availability, and also been observed in a range of habitats. Kittens will typically spend about 6 to 8 weeks of their lives in those dens, depending on the mother. And the first 2 to 3 weeks, the mother will spend most of the time nursing the kittens. And at the period, she spends more time away from the den to wean the kittens and hunt down prey to bring to the den. And once they're old enough to leave the den, they hunt in the company of their mother. And once they are old enough to leave the den, they hunt in the company of their mother. And then male panthers do not encountered frequently during this time, as females and males typically avoid each other when they're not breeding. Kittens are usually 2 months old when they begun hunting with their mothers, and 2 years at 2 years of age, that's when they typically begin to hunt and live on their own, which is quite cool. So there's quite a few threats that affect the Florida panther. So humans threaten the Florida panther through poaching and wildlife control methods, and also besides human mortality, their biggest threat is habitat fragmentation. And being historically persecuted, they are now pretty much only found in Florida and restricted to this area in southern Florida. And the population has become inbred with and have kinked tails, but also sperm and heart problems. And the 2 highest causes of mortality for individual Florida panthers are things like automobile collisions and territorial aggression between Florida panthers. And these incidents will injure the panthers. Feral and Florida wildlife officials will take them to wild oak conservation to rehab and recover, to help them recover and rehabilitate them to be introduced. Additionally, wild oak raises orphan kittens and have done so to about 12 individuals. Most recently, an orphaned brother and sister were brought to the center at 5 months old in 2011 when their mother was found dead in Collier County, and after being raised, they were released in early 2013. So as I mentioned, primary threats include habitat loss, habitat degradation, and habitat fragmentation. So they losing habitat, getting less good habitat, but also its habitat's getting fragmented. With southern Florida being a fast developing area, there's extremely controversial places for the location, and then seems the roads to kill panthers are increasing. So things like that as well. Disease is another big issue. So antigen analysis has found Florida panthers show evidence of feline immunodeficiency disease and lentovirus. So that's a big issue as well. Mercury poison has been identified as a potential threat, as one female in the park died. Chemicals, as I mentioned, that have been brought into the ecosystem, things like beramol and collodrocone and those kind of things. Also genetic depletion because they are isolated. So cougars used to live all across North America from the top to the bottom, but they have been wiped out from most of the eastern side of the US except for Florida. So being isolated from the rest of the panthers and being at such a small population has caused inbreeding depression. So they're basically suffering from issues, as I mentioned, that come from inbreeding depression, like issues with sperm, issue with congenital defects, so things like, as we mentioned, heart problems, and also these things like the kinked tail. So these are because of inbreeding, but also as well vehicle strikes. So they live in large home ranges with many roads potentially going between them, and that means they get hit by cars. And the number of Florida panthers actually being killed by cars is actually increasing a lot, and have been traffic collisions has been responsible for the majority of panther deaths between 2014 and 2021. But as I mentioned, they are considered endangered or critically endangered, and they were listed as their own subspecies, but there are recovery efforts luckily to help protect these panthers. It is a difficult task because they need large habitats, And each breeding unit containing a male or 2 to 5 females requires about 200 square miles of habitat. And they've actually become a conservation flagship for and a major contributor to the keystone ecological and evolutionary process of the environment. So looking at a population that's sustainable enough, about 240 panthers would require between 8 to 12,000 square miles, or about 21 to 31,000 square kilometers of habitat and significant genetic diversity to avoid inbreeding. However, a study in 2006 found about 3,800 square miles or 9,800 square kilometers of free panthers. And they introduced the introduction of 8 female cougars from a closely related Texas population has apparently actually mitigated a lot of these problems. So introducing new genetics from closely related populations in Texas has really helped these problems, which is really good. And they are considered outside Florida. They have been seen vagrants. There's a Georgia man that found one in Georgia, and he was fined because he killed it. He was fined and handed a hunting ban for hunting this panther, so he's kind of not allowed to hunt anymore. The habitat conservation has been particularly important since they're trying to protect the forests and habitat that they live in. So they're putting trackers on them to try and track exactly where they want to keep them or how to help them. And in terms of management, there has been some kind of controversy, as leading panther expert David Marr was actually paid by land developers to produce faulty science papers to permit the construction of stuff on destroyed construction projects that destroyed Florida panther habitats. So that's actually illegal and a very big worry. And in light of the accusations, they actually found the panel, and they tried to look at that and suggested they actually did. The permits, the 2 white papers, they contended the habitat development was permitted, should not have been, and was actually paid by the developers, and the faulty science researchers would give the necessary permitting to destroy this habitat that they needed. And they discredited David Marker, who's now he's like, you basically let this habitat go away just because you wanted money. So now he's discredited and left to study black bears in Kentucky. And he died in a plane accident in 2008 while doing bear research. But yeah, in terms of their relationship with humans, if encountered, the advice is do not run, since that may stimulate their prey chasing instinct. But instead, it's best to stand and face the animal and make eye contact. But most Florida panthers will avoid confrontation, and in the event of being attacked, the individual should fight back without turning their back. And further, there's actually never been a reported panther attack in Florida, but in western states, people have been attacked and fought back sufficiently successfully with rock sticks or even their bare hands. So you might not encounter one in Florida, but as they become more common, and I imagine with more rewilding efforts around eastern US, there may be more cougars coming in. So that's just fight back, really. And in terms of their culture, they are considered the Florida state animal, and in 2023, they were actually featured on the United States Postal Service Forever stamp as part of their endangered species set, based on the photograph from PhotoArc. And there was actually a documentary called Path of the Panther, which was trying to highlight the conservation efforts to protect Florida panthers and preserve wildlife corridors in Florida. So luckily they are getting a lot of protection, which they deserve because they are quite cool and they're an important population regardless. It'd be cool to see them to become more common around the eastern US as well, but having them at least there is still a win. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of these guys. So that was done by Pork13 or Pork13. So now we've got a couple mods from Great Cakes mods, a couple extinct species. So let's have a look at these guys. We have got Uintatherium, a really, really cool animal that I'm so excited to talk about. So this is Uintatherium, and he's done such a great, Great Cakes mod has done such a great reconstruction. This guy just looks like a beauty, isn't he? But yeah, so this is Uintatherium, or Beast of the Uinta Mountains. These guys are an extinct species of herbivorous dinoceratin mammal, which lived during the Eocene, and there's 2 different species recognized, Uintatherium aniceps from the United States during the early to middle Miocene, which were about 56 to 38 million years ago, and U. inspecticus, which comes from the middle late Miocene, or 48 to 34 million years ago in China. So we're talking about the American species, so this is aniceps, just from, or anceps, as we'd say that as we move on. So these guys are quite a large browsing animal, not burrowing. They have a skull that's about 76 centimeters or 30 inches long, with a about 1.5 meters or about 5 feet at the shoulder. and body length about 4 meters or about 13 feet and weighed about 2 tons. These guys were about the size of today's rhinoceros and quite similar both in size and shape. And its legs were quite robust to sustain the weight of the animal and were equipped with hooves. And moreover, actually the sternum of these guys made of horizontal segments, unlike today's rhinos which have compressed vertical segments. So that's quite interesting. In terms, we'll talk about their skull because that's kind of really what's interesting about them. So the most unusual feature of the skull, which was kind of that large and strongly built skull, as you kind of see there, just look how interesting that skull is. You can see that there. So there was very large and strongly built, but is simultaneously both flat and concave, which is a feature is rare and not seen in other known mammals except for some brontotheres. The cranial cavity is thought to be extremely small, so they had a small brain, because the walls of their cranium was extremely thick, and the cranium was lightened by several sinuses, like those in an elephant skull. You kind of see they've got that big lip there. The teeth were larger in males than in females, and you can see that large upper canine teeth that they have there would have been large and formed formidable defensive weapons, and superficially they resembled those of saber-toothed cats. So there's a lot of species actually that are herbivores and still have these large canine teeth, like musk deer. There's a few extinct species of rhino had the same thing, so it's not uncommon that a herbivore would have that. There was actually a synapsid, I think it's called Tachanodrudens or something like that, that had saber teeth like that would just use them for fighting, not for hunting. And the front of the male skulls, you can see, bore all these ossicones, very similar to those what you see in okapis and giraffes, which were both projected between 5 to 25 centimeters, or about 2 to 9.8 inches. And their function is unknown, but they're thought to may have been used for defense and sexual display, so they potentially could have charged other animals with them and potentially would have locked heads with other males and fight each other with them. Very similar to like modern giraffes and potentially like other and like deer and things like that. Would have locked cones and kind of just attacked each other. Though there was a lot of interesting when they first kind of discovered them, they thought they may have had antlers, very similar to like the modern deer and things like that. But due to the texture of the bone, it suggests they would have had these ossicones. In terms of its discovery, fossils of Uintatherium were first described from the Bridger Basin near Fort Bridger by Lieutenant W. H. Nan in September 1870, and were first described as a new species of Uintatherium by Neil Marsh in 1871. But the specimen only consisted of some skull features, things like that. But then in 1872, they named Uintatherium robustum from a posterior skull and partial mandible. Another specimen was kind of named. And then they were all kind of lumped because that was the best way to kind of, look at them. 18 days after the description of Uintatherium, they found a new genera of these guys called Loxophodon and also Titanoceros. And due to Uintatherium being the first name, they were all lumped into Uintatherium. And they also described 2 genera in his telegram, which is Lophodon and Eobasileus, with Eobasileus we're covering next, but Lophodon was lumped into Uintatherium. And a lot of these other species were all lumped into Uintatherium. There was a trio, there was like 25 species that were described. This is part of the Bone Wars particularly as well. They were all kind of lumped into Uintatherium because a lot of them were very fragmentary, but they all kind of connected with each other. Oh, they're actually all just Uintatherium. So yeah. And as I mentioned, described anceps. And many initial discoveries have been found in Uintatheria, and it's actually one of the best known and popular American fossil mammals, which is quite cool. Princeton University launched expeditions to look at the Eocene beds of Wyoming in the 1870s and 1880s, which found several partial skulls and named several species of Uintathera that now are all lumped under the species Uintatherium anceps. And many reassessments came in the 1960s, and now they're all kind of unified on that species as well. And a cask of the Uintatherium skeleton is on display in the Utah Field his House of Natural History State Park, and a skeleton is also on display in the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. And there is a new species also described, as I mentioned, from an almost intact skull, and Specticus from the lower part of the Lucy Formation in China, but most fossils come from the anceps which lived in America. So yeah, really, really cool animal. I love the reconstruction. Most reconstructions of this species really make them look, like really gangly and weird, but this actually just feels like a proper mammal. Great Text Mod has really done a great job of that with all the extinct mammals that they've been commissioned to do. But you can see this is the female. The male, you can see, has got a lot more of extreme ossicones. And you can see the cute little baby. Let's have a look at the cute little baby. Look at this cute little guy. Look how adorable he is. So yeah, another really awesome mob. Loved colours. Nice to see some really good reconstructions. I know Great Cakes Mod has been doing a great job of that recently. Yeah, amazing. I love this guy. Definitely a winner. Winner chicken dinner in my opinion. So next up, we're going to have a look at the other species we mentioned. So this is a close relative. It's also Uintatherium. So this is Eobasileus. So let's have a look at these guys. So this is the Horned Dawn King, and it was a prehistoric species of Dinotherem mammal, so a close relative of Uintatherium. So it has a skull about 1 meter long, or about 3.3 feet, and stood about 2.1 meters, or about 6'9" at the shoulder, and was estimated to weigh about 2.5 tons, or about 5,500 kilograms. It is considered the largest Uintatherium. And it looked very much like its relative, the Uintatherium, as we mentioned before, but it was slightly larger. And you can see it also, but more similarly, it had these 3 pairs of blunt or horns or ossicones, which were covered in skin. And the frontal part may actually been compressed. The frontal pair may have been composed of keratin, very much like the horns of a rhinoceros. And like Uintatherium, they would have had, you can see those kind of saber teeth, and these would have also been shielded by bony protrusions of the lower jaw, so that's how they would have looked. There was a specific dispute over Eobasileus, specifically with the Uintatherium more generally, which helped spark the bone wars and why there was so many species named. So Edward Drinker Cope, O'Neill Charles Marsh, and Joseph Lady actually independently discovered specimens of related species, though Cope and Marsh believed to each discover the same species in Fort Bridger area, and disputes over the naming have been going on and off for ages. And most of those names, as mentioned, have all been lumped into, they've pretty much all been lumped into Uintatherium aniceps, but Eobasileus Coricus has actually stood the test of time, so it's another species closely related, just a little bit bigger. And in 1873, for example, Marsh wrote to Cope. Cope has endeavoured to secure priority by sharp precision and failed. Pacific Cope's errors will continue to invoke correction, but these blunders are hydra-headed, and life is really too short to spend valuable time in such an ungracious task. And yeah, basically just gave up with them. But yeah, they do see this animal does seem to be its own species and own genus. So it stood the test of time, and you can see there's not too much of a difference between them, but it's nice to get the both species, because they do look rather pretty. And this is slightly bigger. And considering this came out, these guys lived in the Eocene, so right after the time of dinosaurs. So they would have been the first real big mammals, to reach like a rhino size or bigger. So they would have been very interesting, and also not very closely related to modern big herbivores. So a great example of like convergent evolution, but also how mammals recovered from the End-Cretaceous extinction and took over the world. So that's the male there. We'll have a look at the female. So yeah, her you can see her ossicones are not quite as extreme, but he still looks quite nice. I like the difference between them. And then you got the cute little baby. So there's a real little cutie there. Really, really awesome. Love the colours on these guys. Yeah, as I mentioned, Great Cakes Mod always does a wonderful job. So, yeah, I think I will finish up here. Already covered everyone. So, yeah, thank you, Great Cakes Mod. Thank you, Mega Kebab. And thank you, Pork. You've all done really... Pork 13. You've all done really wonderful jobs with the species. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to click the little bell icon to know when I upload anything. So, yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.